Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. The things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded January 21st, 2020. This is podcast number 38, Scrupulosity OCD. Today, of course, we're talking about Scrupulosity OCD, better known also as Religious OCD. And what I want to do first is give the definition from the International OCD Foundation, just to kind of set a base for it. Their description, or their definition, I should say, is a form of OCD involving religious or moral obsessions. Scrupulous individuals are overly concerned that something they thought or did might be a sin or other violations of religious or moral doctrine. So let's talk about some of the intrusive thoughts. Now, my sources that I'm pulling from here are, one is the International OCD Foundation itself. The other one is from intrusivethoughts.org. So let's go into, and these are kind of a mix from both of those sources, but let's talk about the intrusive thoughts that somebody that has scrupulosity goes through. First is repetitive thoughts about being sinful, dishonest, or lacking integrity. Second is ruminating about past mistakes, errors, or possible sinful behavior. Excessive fear of possibilities of committing blasphemy. And blasphemy basically is things you do against God or religion. Excessive focus of religious or moral perfection. So worrying about being perfect at religion, and if you're not, you're going to go to hell. It also kind of goes around the idea of losing control. We don't want to lose control because that could be a sin. That could push us off into the gates of hell. Unwanted sexual thoughts about religious figures, gods, saints, Jesus, priests, nuns, anything to do with any person or figure that has to do with the religious, thinking about Joseph, Mary, all of those. Repetitive thoughts of eternal damnation, which again evolves too around the idea of really focusing on death and what's going to happen at death and worrying about what comes with death if we're not in the right place, if we haven't been saved, if we haven't been whatever. Excessive fear that loved ones are going to hell. So you try to do, and I think my mother was part of this too in a way, that she worried about that if we weren't on the right path, if we didn't do the right things, if we didn't go to church every Sunday, that could be our destination. Now, some of the common compulsions of the scrupulosity involve excessive cleansing and purifying ourselves, which could lead to cleaning, bathing, showering, dousing ourselves with holy water, or doing things to our body that we believe are purifying or cleansing. Could even, I could see it even leading to things like cutting and scarring bodies, things like that, punishments. Excessive going to confession to religious leaders, priests, rabbis, etc. Avoiding certain objects that are associated with immorality. Watching a dirty movie, hanging around with people that aren't religious. I know when I was younger, it was considered not good. I don't know if it was considered quite a sin, but to be around non-Catholic people for me, and I'm sure it follows, maybe non-Jewish people, non-whatever. We were also told as Catholics it was a sin to marry out of our religion. Or the other one was a sin was to marry a divorced person. The Catholic Church wouldn't even do it for that matter. Another one is excessive praying or reading of religious text. And here it's repeating it too, over and over and over and over. Seeking reassurance, both from religious people, others that ones that we believe have not sinned and that have been moral. We want to seek reassurance from them that we're not that, and including seeking reassurance from God. And part of that is, making deals with God to avoid going to hell. What I'm trying to remember, it was an old movie with Burt Reynolds in it. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was, but if I remember, Burt Reynolds was kind of on a suicide path. He really just wanted to end his life, and he goes out and decides to go into the ocean and drown himself. And I'm trying to remember I think he swims out, if I remember right. And he goes out and he goes out and he goes out and decides to just let himself go and to drown. And goes to do it, but he can't do it. And he pops back up out of the water and starts swimming to the shore, and at the same time stopping and praying to God as he gets, as he's further out, the farther out he is, the higher the percentage is of, God, if you just get me back, I will spend the rest of my life, honoring you, serving you, whatever, And then as it gets closer, God, if you get me the rest of the way, I'll go to church every Sunday. By the time he gets to shore, he kind of gives up on all of that. But, so it's this making deals with God that is part of this, that's so concerned about going to hell that you really want to bargain with God, like he's going to bargain. Avoidance of religious services, traditions, objects, things, due to fears of being unworthy or sinful. So unworthy of being there, not deserving to be in those places, around those things like that. So some of the misconceptions of it, a person that has scrupulosity is not necessarily more devout, more religious than another person. In fact, I would almost think it was just the opposite. They're so obsessed with not doing something that they really don't get into the religion as much as other people do. And that people with scrupulosity care about their character, their morals, or ethics more than other non-sufferers. And that's actually not true. They are actually doubting most of that stuff and thinking that everybody else has more than they do, and they really got to put their nose to the grindstone. They got to suffer. They got to do penance to even try to get to what other people have or what they assume other people have. That's another one that people tend to look at other people and go, well, they're moral because this or that or the other, because they go to church every Sunday, because they seem to be good people, but they don't really know what's going on, that those people are really going through. Now, one of the misconceptions that they talk about in these different sites is that there's really only one type of OCD. It's just OCD. that it's really not, that scrupulosity doesn't exist, some of these harm doesn't exist, etc. And there's something about that I guess a couple of things about it. One is I kind of agree that OCD is OCD, but it just has different formations and different things that are obsessed over. So you have person who has OCD, because the treatment for it is really pretty much all the same. Here's the thought I have is, one, that I think that it helps to be able to name specific types so that people can define it in their own life. If you just said OCD is OCD and it just depends on what you obsess over, well, then people can doubt, do what I have, is that really OCD? Whereas now if you have some definitions of different styles or types of OCD, it'll help a person to be able to say, oh wow, so I didn't know if that was really for sure that was OCD, but it really looks like religious or scrupulosity. It looks like harm. And it helps that person then to define it for themselves and then begin to work on it. But like I said, the treatment for I think all OCDs pretty much is ERP, which we talk about in other podcasts, exposure response prevention. That is the recommended and suggested treatment by the International OCD Foundation itself. And it really fits for all OCD, no matter the type, really. There's a few thoughts about like pure OCD that it might take more than that. And you have things that you add to ERP that can help too, like mindfulness, like ACT, which we just did a podcast on. And like I do with EFT, the tapping process, which helps in the treatment and speed up of ERP. All these things we add to ERP just help speed it up and make it more efficient. But yet it is still the major treatment for OCD, no matter the type. So I hope this helps in understanding what scrupulosity OCD is, or religious OCD, and that knowing that it is just like all OCDs, it is something that I would not call curable. I would call manageable and having the ability to let go and not have OCD control your life. Those are the outcomes, the goals of it, is to be able to live in what I would call a normal life where OCD is just managed very well. So I hope this has helped, and I thank you for being here. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at Family OCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.